Want more Culturescape? Join our Patreon. Get sneak peeks, suggest guests, and join our exclusive Discord. Support Culturescape on Patreon today.
A lot of people think, like, oh, Gene doesn't really get involved in the culture war. I mean, that's by design. So around 6th or 7th grade, my buddy, whose brother was a meth dealer, had enough money to afford a Super Famicom. The brother would be doing his thing, cooking stuff up, and we'd just be in the living room playing Dragon Ball games. You have a function in society as a journalist. That's something that people tend to forget. You know, this isn't creative writing. That was a triple homicide. And I got to the crime scene, and he was sitting on the curb with his jaw hanging off of his face. And then I get a phone call from my editor saying, Gene, you need to get it back into town. A baby was just thrown on the freeway. So when I got that email, I just dropped to my knees and I started sobbing. The world just kind of becomes mute. I built too good of a life at this point for me to leave this.
Hello and welcome to Culturescape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers who built nerd culture. And I'm thrilled to introduce today's special guest. He's one of the most talented and respected games journalists around, having interviewed legends like Todd Howard of Bethesda Studios, MGS auteur Hideo Kojima, whom he counts as a personal friend, and the CEOs of both Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, and many more. His origins are humble. Growing up in Guam, he developed a love for video games and nerd culture, which led him to a diverse career as a crime reporter, a sometimes beauty pageant judge, a social media expert, and PR guru. He's an Orange Cat stan, a cancer survivor, and known as one of the kindest people in media. Working today at the Washington Post, he's become a universally respected reporter, making games journalism more fun and approachable for all audiences. I'm honored to introduce today's guest, Gene Park of the Washington Post. Welcome to the show, Gene.
Hey Peter, good to catch you on camera and talk to you in person. We've been friends for a good minute now, and I appreciate all the years of support and kind words that you've given me over the years. I really appreciate that. I've never forgotten it.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'll just get the love fest out of the way. I have huge respect for your work as a journalist, but just as like a person. You know, you seem very real and you're very kind and patient, and you're just awesome. I'm a huge fan.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Man. I try. People test my patience, but you know, I've been through enough. That was a great intro too. One of the more comprehensive intros that I've received, because a lot of people forget, you know, where I come from. Look, I hate it whenever people say, "Oh, long time games journalist." I'm like, it hasn't been that long, guys. It's only late 2019.
One of the things I really appreciate about Eugene, and I maybe this is because I'm at heart, maybe I'm a rejected theater kid, but you seem just a little bit different than a lot of people in the media. You're very real. You're very down to earth. You're more approachable. And that's not to say that other people who work in journalism aren't, or that there's no value in having a different personality type. But that's kind of rare. Like, I can count the number of people that are kind of like that maybe on two hands. Why is that? Why are you so normal?
Yeah. I think there's a variety of reasons. I wonder if are you referring to games journalism or just regular media? Because
probably media in general. Yeah,
probably media in general. Yeah, I mean both too, right? It's a little different because I come from different backgrounds from both. In the mainstream space, you know, when I hear that, I largely contributed to the fact that I did not attend an Ivy League school. I did not come from a privileged background. I'm not heir to any kind of wealth, or I'm not the son of a lawyer even, or a doctor. I'm just the son of a guy who worked as a bellhop at a hotel, and eventually, you know, worked his way up to becoming a hotel manager and a hotelier. But before that, it was just all humble beginnings, you know. So I did not attend any kind of Ivy League school or anything like that. Most of my colleagues at the Washington Post or the New York Times or CNN all come from at least NYU or Harvard or Yale. But I went to a public state school in California, Cal State Fullerton, right here on the sticker on my microphone. State school. I graduated with no college debt. I paid about $1,000 a year to get college educated. Well, maybe not that $1,000 a year. Maybe it was $1,000 a semester. Probably, I think the worst it got was about $2,000. You know, not including room and board at the dorm. But I left with no college debt at all. I got a real basic, simple education. A lot of my friends never went to college, so that keeps me real in touch with people who aren't college educated. As Trump says, I love the poorly educated. Um, obviously one of his more ineloquent lines, but one line, it's a line that I remember clearly because it resonated with me because I related to it very, very strongly, even though he said it very poorly. So I'm in touch with people who are just not really, online or really connected or really collegiate or academic. I still struggle from paycheck to paycheck. So I think that's where a lot of the humility comes from, and also my upbringing on Guam and also Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii for 8 years before I moved to DC. I've been in DC now for 9 years, so longer than Hawaii. If you can imagine, I can't even believe that. But in Hawaii, there's a lot. They do encourage a lot of humility, much to my chagrin, because I'm not a very humble person. Sometimes
Mhm.
I do like to brag and puff myself up, and that's largely due to the influence of one of my former idols, Mr. Kanye West. Who it wasn't until I started listening to the music of Mr. Kanye West that I really started to learn to love myself. There's a famous Kanye quote that says, "If you're a fan of Kanye, you're not really a fan of Kanye. It means you're a fan of yourself." And it's words like that are really like resonate with me and really kind of inspired me to kind of achieve more. But um, yeah, I think that's about it. I just remember what I just never forget where I come from. I come from humble beginnings. Guam is a very, very small place. It's a rough place. A lot of my crazy stories come from there because it's a crazy place. It's a place where the drinking age wasn't 21 until just a couple years ago. It's kind of the Wild West, but still the United States, a very colonized nation. But a lot of penetration by Asian population, a lot of Asian tourists. So a lot of people cater into the Asian market there. So, for folks who don't know, but I grew up around guns. Guam is a very, very huge gun heavy population. So, my grandfather, who was a native Guamanian, was a sheriff. And then so I shot guns when I was like 6 or 7 years old. So, you know, it's stuff like that, that the parts of my background like that really kind of make me kind of feel different from the mainstream media. I remember one training at a journalism convention, right?
Mhm.
And this is training by former or prior service military journalists, right?
Yeah.
And they were going to train folks on guns and how to cover guns. And so it was a big old convention room, and they asked how
I'm
many
sure
people
that was
here.
fun.
Yeah, so they asked how many people have shot a gun before, and out of like but maybe like I don't want to say hundreds, but maybe like over 100 people in the room. It was me and one other person that raised their hand, and that reporter was astounded. I was astounded. I was like, "Oh my god!" Like, how is this such a huge blind spot for American journalists? I don't understand how such a huge part of American culture missed all of these journalists. And it's moments like that that make me realize how out of touch other journalists really are, and because they are being hired from these upper middle class like societies and civilization communities where they are very gated, they're very rich, they don't have a lot of exposure to a lot of different other cultures, and then they get hired, and then they're supposed to be speaking for the people, the
Yep.
public. I don't know about that, man. You know, I've covered a lot right there, but I think that to me that really kind of signals how out of touch the rest of the media is.
Yeah. In Guam, you have to have all those guns because all those snakes. Guam has more
Yes,
snakes than like anywhere else on planet Earth.
Yes, I used to catch snakes in high school because there were just snakes in school. So we would just get them, and then we'll bring them to the cafeteria, and we'll scare the cafeteria ladies and be like, "Hey, Evelyn, can you cook this up? Mix it in with my fried rice or whatever." And yeah, Guam is a very, very heavy rancher community too. My grandfather, who I mentioned, did have a ranch, and I grew up on his ranch. So that's why when that viral post, that viral tweet about guns and 30 to 50 feral hogs, if people don't know, someone replied on Twitter to say, like, what am I going to do? I need my assault rifles because I need to be able to kill 30 to 50 feral hogs. Everybody made fun of him. And then there's a whole other group of people who were like, no, he is explaining a very, very real problem, that there is only so much you can do to deal with a couple dozen feral hogs, including shooting them with assault rifles or blowing them up with fucking grenades. But it is a real problem, and we do have very hard solutions, and it might require an assault rifle.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the interesting things is my grandparents, when my grandpa was in the Air Force, they were stationed on Guam for quite a while there.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, one of their stories they tell is when they were first moving to Guam, they made the mistake that with the kids' room, they would sometimes leave their windows open, and they had this problem where my aunts, when they're young, they're coming in, Mom, Dad, you got to help me. There's a monster that keeps going in our room, and my grandparents were just like, we just want to sleep. There's nothing there. Go to bed. And this happens like 2-3 nights, and on the third night, my grandpa's like, fine, I'll go in there. And there was a boar was visiting their house, and he was just, oh, hey, what are you guys doing in here?
Oh my goodness.
So it's a crazy place.
Yeah. Boars are a problem. Another part of my background is as you mentioned, it is a huge military, Navy and Air Force presence. So in high school, I thought about joining the Navy. It's part of the culture of Guam. Guam was liberated in World War II from the Japanese by the U.S. Marines. So Guam is a very, very nationalistic and jingoistic and patriotic colonized nation. But I thought about joining the Navy, and so I signed up for the Navy Reserve Officer Training Corps, or JROTC, and I got chased by a boar during our field training exercises. Boars are a real problem. So when I saw 30 to 50 feral hogs, I was like, no, he's talking sense. I don't know why you guys are making fun of him. I know it sounds really funny, but it's insane. You really got to make sure these boars don't f your shit up.
Yeah, they will. They certainly will.
Yeah.
One of the things, and this is something you said that my grandparents said, is that because of Guam's location is specific, it is actually a tourist destination, especially, I guess also for Korean, but also especially Japanese tourists.
Yes.
And so you've tell me a little bit, how did you get into video games? Because you kind of have a unique experience, how you got introduced and learned to love games.
Yeah, well, I actually, it's actually my pen tweet on my profile, but the first video game I ever played was The Making of a Karateka by Jordan Mechner. And Jordan Mechner is the creator of Prince of Persia, more famously known as. But before that, he made Karateka when he was a high school student, and he finished it, I think, when he was starting to attend Yale. But that was on Guam, and I'm actually still friends with that guy. He actually ended up joining the Air Force, and he's actually somewhere out here working in the Department of Defense right now. I haven't seen him in a couple of years, but he's actually out here. But yeah, the buddy of mine, when I was like 5 or 6 years old, he invited me over to his house, and he had an Apple II computer, and he was playing Karateka, and I was like, "What is this magic? I've seen cartoons and movies before, but you're pressing buttons and everything is moving." I thought it was fascinating. So when I came back home, I was like, I need video games. And then so my grandmother, as you said, there's a huge pipeline between Japan and Guam, especially as a tourist destination. Because for Japan, Guam is much closer than Hawaii, much closer than California. So it is a way to get a taste of American tourism. In a place that's much cheaper and much closer. It's just a 3.5 hour flight away, no problem. my grandmother was actually living in Japan, which is very strange for a Korean woman. But she, during Japanese occupation during the war, she actually really really loved Japanese culture. She did not reject the imperial colonialism. She wholly embraced it. She really thought Japanese culture is fascinating. So she ended up moving to Japan, and so
Huh.
she was pretty much like a Japanese woman. And then, of course, she went to Guam for vacation, because a lot of, folks who work in office ladies, blue white collar workers would end up going to Guam. And she went there, and then she met a gentleman there, a local man. And that was my grandpa, the sheriff, and the guy with the ranch. So she ended up falling in love with him, got married, decided to stay on Guam. And that's how my parents ended up there, because, my dad was a college dropout, and he had nothing going on for himself. So she was like, why don't you just move to the United States? It's better here. And then he did. And then he ended up working at bellhop. I got bored. I went to my friend's house and played karateka at Apple II. Came back and said, I really need video games. And my grandmother, on a trip to Japan, came back with a Famicom and a whole box, like a picnic basket. It was like a big old picnic basket full of Famicom games. And that was really where I got started. It was just a couple dozen games. It was a ton of libraries. It was like getting Xbox Game Pass, like at 6 years old.
Yeah, in the late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you were playing import games, right? Of course, you're not fluent. You don't read Japanese, or you don't speak the Japanese. I'm sure that was interesting for like a 7-8-year-old trying to make sense of that.
Yeah, it was very strange. I thought I was because my grandmother was so Japanese inspired. She would talk to me in Japanese, and we would eat Japanese food, and she would dress me up in Japanese clothing, and I would go to the Japanese like autumn festivals and do like the bonbon dance. So for the first several years of my life, I thought I was Japanese. I just didn't know how to read Japanese at all. So I was playing all these games. And I was
Awesome.
hearing all these Japanese words, and then it wasn't until I went to school and I met other Japanese kids, and they're like, why the fuck are you saying you're Japanese when I clearly wasn't? And then that's when I learned I was Korean. But yeah, I did play a lot of import games. It was a cool way for me to be introduced. Import games are much harder for folks in the States, but for me, like for example, the Dragon Ball games. A lot of people grew up on the Budokai Tenkaichi games, right, for the PS2. But I grew up on the Super Famicom games and the Famicom games, the ones that never came out to the States. And I was only able to play that because at the Super Famicom level, because I could never get a Super Famicom at that point. At that point, import games started to become really, really expensive, right? But my buddy, whose brother was a meth dealer, had enough money to afford a Super Famicom and import all these amazing, amazing Dragon Ball games. So around 6th or 7th grade, after school, I would always go to his house, and the brother would be doing his thing, cooking stuff up, and we'd just be in the living room playing Dragon Ball games. And I would just be like, I can't believe I'm playing a Dragon Ball game. This is amazing. I never really cared about what was going on in the back, anyways. But
Wow,
yeah,
that's Guam
fun stuff.
is an interesting place.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a very safe environment for a couple of
It's
kids.
so I mean, again, that's the thing. Like, it's not a good environment. It's such a contrast to Hawaii, which is such a beautiful place and a wholesome place and very, very family oriented. Whereas in Guam, it's very much like the red light district of the Pacific Islands. So the town I grew up in was actually the tourist attraction town. So I grew up around the area that has per capita the most strip clubs per square mile in the world.
Snakes and strip clubs. That's Guam's claim to fame.
Yeah. So again, I grew up around guns and naked women, because my other best friend, who was around 6 or 7, his mom owned one of the strip clubs, and he was a guy who had a Sega Mega Drive, and so I always wanted to go play that, and so I just go to the strip club with him after school, because that's where mom is, and then so we just wait until she gets off. She owns the place. She wasn't dancing, but we knew all the dancers, and they sold cheeseburgers there. So just get out of school, eat some cheeseburgers, and just wait until we can get home and play some Sega games.
I was only half joking when I was saying we're going to jump into to deep Gene lore, but there actually is deep Gene Park lore.
Yeah. I mean, video games were always part of it,
Yeah, no, you the meth dealer, the strip club, the feral boars, the snakes.
Yeah, I mean, Guam's a crazy place, And the funny thing, though, is that folks at the LSM community have been trying to fact check me, and I appreciate that. I think you should be skeptical about shit I say, right? But the great thing is that they are fact checking me, and they're like, well, from what I can tell, everything seems to be lining up. He does have a history of being a beauty pageant judge, and when and then they found an old public access TV show out in Hawaii, where the host, a beautiful friend of mine named Willow, a beautiful woman, but she was the host, and she referred to me as a ladies' man. So it's like, well, he does seem to have a history of being a ladies' man too, and there is like third-party confirmation. So it's like, yeah, I do appreciate people out there fact checking me. That's okay. I don't say these stories. I try to say stories that I think I can back up, or at least there is one other person who can verify what I say. Because if I ever do decide to write a book, I do want to compile all that stuff. So.
You should. This is we've only spoken for 20 minutes. It's just utterly fascinating. One of the things I like you about Gene is you are kind of, as a reporter, you're kind of an old head. This is how it used to work, basically, for people who don't know. The people who came into news, into journalism, generally, they weren't going to school for journalism necessarily. That law working class people background. And the way you would climb the ladder is you would work at your local outlet and you would get a beat. And then you would just hop up the ladder. And if you were successful in your career, maybe at the end of it, you would end up in one of the big newspapers. Or if you're in TV news, one of the big stations, etc. And that's kind of you. Your beat just sounds terrifying, which is crime reporter, which I couldn't be a crime reporter. I have a hard enough time covering like health and disability and like all the sad things that happen there. That messes me. I couldn't even imagine being a crime reporter. What was that like? Gene Park, PI, back in Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaii and Guam. It was traumatizing. I was fortunate enough to be a crime reporter in two island communities where there isn't a lot of random violence like you would find in like a city like, for example, where I live, Washington, D.C., where people just get shot for no reason or people get robbed for no reason. A lot of the crimes and murder and mayhem that happen in Guam and Hawaii were definitely mostly crimes of passion. If there was a random shooting, it was probably for some kind of reason, and that's when like I would actually go into PI mode. One of my favorite stories was just a random shooting where a guy escaped from the trunk of a car and ran out in the street, and then the two drivers stopped and came out and riddled him with bullets with a Uzi. And then you were like, okay, well, was he fucking someone or whatever like that? And then I actually did a background research on the victim, and the victim was a drug dealer and from California. And so I had to do court record searches in California, and that's how I found him by cross tracing the former aliases that he used, because we couldn't find his real name. So I had to use one of his former aliases, and I found him in California, and it turns out he was a drug dealer. And the whole murder was a drug deal gone wrong. That he fucked over the guys that shot him. And he probably, that was a consequence. Him being riddled with bullets was a consequence of that murder. So that was a fun story. And then there are other really horrific stories. The worst day on record. There's two worst days on Guam. There was one that was a triple homicide because he went to a vegetable stand. We got vegetable stands in Guam, and he shot the three people there, including the girl that he was obsessed with, who rejected him, 17-year-old kid that was working there, and the girl's mom.
Horrible.
And then he tried to shoot himself, and then he missed. And then I got to the crime scene where all three bodies were still there, very fresh, and he was sitting on the curb with his jaw hanging off of his face. So,
Yeah.
That was like around 1 a.m. I was already drunk, and I covered that story. I finished my story, and then I finished it around 4 a.m. And then I went back, and then I went to the speakeasy bar and got more drunk. So it's been a rough life. It's a huge reason why I became such a huge alcoholic and drug user. Because it was a way for me to kind of cope with the trauma and grief of seeing things like that. I say, yeah, because Guam is such a small place in particular. I was basically a first responder. I would basically get there before the ambulance is there. Get there. Usually the cops were there, and the cops would be the ones giving me the heads up, and that's why I'd be there pretty quick. So yeah, that was tough. And in Hawaii, the worst day was in the morning. I was covering a guy who beat his baby mama to death with a shotgun in front of their son. And then so I was interviewing the son. He was obviously having the worst day of his life, ever having to witness that. And I was interviewing all these traumatized neighbors who had to watch it. And they were standing by because it was a fucking loaded shotgun. And then they didn't know what the fuck to do. And then they just watched this woman die. Terrifying. And then I get a phone call from my editor saying, Gene, you need to get it back into town. A baby was just thrown on the freeway.
Oh no! It's like the worst night ever.
And I was like, "Is it like a fake baby or anything like that?" They're like, "No, I think it's a real baby. You need to get back in town." I said, "Wow, awesome!" And then so I get back on the freeway, and then yeah, I see the crime scene where there are baby parts.
Gracious.
And a guy who was fucking high on meth who just grabbed his fucking neighbor's baby and just threw the baby on the freeway. Absolutely fucking nightmare day. So,
oh, dude, that'd mess up anyone.
Yeah, days like that fuck me up. So that's why I like it was really really hard for me to start drinking. I would get off work and I would just get straight to drinking. I didn't know how, I didn't grow up in again I grew up in Asia Pacific, so this is not, and this is in the 90s and early 2000s. So this is not a time or place where therapy is like accepted or anything. So I definitely didn't go to therapy. I got no consultation or anything like that. The only consultation I got was beer and whiskey.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, we have a big penitentiary here in Sioux Falls, and the people I've known that are cops or that they work at the pen, they've seen a lot, and they're very kind of crass, tough people, and I think those experiences, they're so harsh. Like you really do have to like kind of adapt somehow. And I think, for a lot of people, it does end up being like they use a substance or that comes to impact their family home or it changes them. I mean, that's insanely heavy stuff. I mean, it's hard. I don't think hardly anyone would blame you that that's how you're trying to deal with it.
Yeah, if you speak to any veterans who were actually saw action or cops, you'll find that they have a lot of dark humor. To kind of deal with that stuff, and also the PTSD and everything.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Gene. That's horrible.
So yeah, I have a lot of PTSD from that time. But it did train me to become a really good breaking news journalist. One of the things a couple years ago, one reporter, one games journalist was like, I'm really struggling with turning things around really quickly, right? Because I'm thinking too much about writing and I have too much anxiety about editing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I've been there.
And I gave the advice saying, as a journalist, you need to just not give a shit about your writing, sometimes. You just need to just shut the fuck up. Type words and send it to the editor, and you need to not have an attachment to your writing. And then some game journalists try to ratio me and quote tweet me and say, "Don't ever do this. You have to be passionate about your writing at all times." And I'm like, motherfucker, I am speaking from a completely different method of journalism. You are talking about features writing. You are talking about arts criticism, blah blah blah. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a real fucking deadline. When the freeway is done because there's a body in there and there are thousands of people or hundreds of people stuck in traffic waiting to find out when the freeway is going to be open. So you need to get that news update right now so you can let people know, or you need to tweet that out right now. You can't be passionate about this. And so I got really mad. I was like, you people are forgetting where I come from. I have hundreds or thousands of young regular journalists who work in local news stations or local newspapers, because that's where I come from. That's my background, you know. So I'm talking to them, you know, when there's a breaking news occurrence in their local city or local town. You can't be passionate about, oh my God, my pros, you know. You can't. You have a function in society, you know, as a journalist, and I think that's something that people tend to forget. You know, this isn't creative writing, not all the time, you know.
That is a great point, and that definitely will get into your career as in games journalism. But I think the mistake so many people make when they talk about, you know, the culture war or the bias in media, people want to say it's a political bias, you know, Republican versus Democrat, you know, Trump versus Kamala. I'm like, yeah, I guess that does exist, and that is something that prepares about. But below that, there's almost like a cultural background bias that it's really hard to describe to people, but it makes a huge difference with how people approach when putting together reporting, writing, and publishing the news.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And again, it goes back to all these journalists who don't understand gun culture, for example, right? And then there's all these shootings happening around. And every time they report on a shooting, they always misrepresent what the weapons sounds like. And that affects the trustworthiness of the journalist or their piece, you know? It communicates to people, well, if they can't even get this small thing right, then how can I trust them to get anything else right, you know?
Yeah.
But I do believe you're right that I think you're right that, you know, there are some people who might have a certain political sharp bias, like, oh, I clearly love Democrats or whatever that, and that's clearly true, especially when you see on the timeline. And there are clearly some journalists who are like, oh, pro Biden and everything like that, and it's fucked up when you start when people start hiring people like Jen Psaki or whatever. Who literally used to work for Joe Biden and then now is just working for NBC. So you have stuff like that. But I do think that a large part of the mistrust stems from this hiring practice, where we're only hiring from a certain group of people. And it is folks who are coastal elites, people who live in cities, people who don't come from the Midwest, people who don't come from outside the country, and people who don't come from these Ivy League schools, you know. There was a New York Times thread by their intern coordinator who just tweeted it out. Here are all the top schools that are getting internships from the New York Times. And it's all fucking Columbia Journalism School, Harvard and Yale and everything like that. And everybody fucking rated it. They're like, look at this shit. It's so blatant what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
You know?
100%.
And he was like, well, I'll try to be better. And it's like, but it's clearly this has been a pattern for decades, you know? And it never stopped. And it hasn't stopped. This is like several years ago. And that pattern still continues to hold because there is a huge bias within these elitist Ivy League people to kind of hire their own, you know?
Yeah.
So I feel so I walk around a Washington Post newsroom and I teased him and I call it the Harvard Faculty Lounge, you know? Because there is a huge sense of pride I have by walking around and say, hey, I went to a fucking state school. I had zero college debt. I coasted along. All the money that I spent all went to cocaine and beer and whiskey and not to any some fucking school. And yet I'm still here at the Washington Post, the same spot you all work so hard to work for, you know?
I'm trying to think of the outlet. This came out like just after Google made the big changes last year. That's just gutting everything, and it's fantastic. Man, I want to say maybe it was New York Post. I'll have to find it again. I'll have to dig it up. But it was this great thing, and it opens up this. It talks about, you know, for our newspaper, we brought in the interns, so we're going to bring in this guy. We're bringing in this pro, someone who has years and years on their beat. And they were like, okay, so what do we want to do if we want to succeed in journalism? And the first thing the guy says, don't become a journalist or marry rich. And the people are like, you're joking, right? He was not joking. Like,
Man.
like it's insane. You were with Launcher, right? You're now the only. You are the surviving. So I don't know if that makes you the best. This is there can only be one, and it's Gene Park. He's the winner, or it's just the sad part of the sad state of the media. But there was Launcher at the Washington Post, which was doing well, or at least was growing, which is more than many places can say. And you had all kinds of colleagues. They were doing all kinds of amazing things. Nate Grayson, I think, was one of them. He was doing amazing things covering the stuff going on with G4, for example, at the time. And it just like that, even that wasn't enough. And then everyone was just poof, gone. And
Well,
then
that's right. He was doing a lot of, you were doing a lot of G4 coverage too, but Nathan was also doing a lot of that too. I remember that. That's right.
it's so crazy. I mean, how do you feel about the state of media right now? You're very popular, so I think it'd be a tremendous mistake for them to be like, Gene Park, gone, because that'd be very, very stupid in my opinion. But media never seems to surprise me at the level of, not the people who work in media necessarily, but the people who control it, the level of stupidity they have when it comes to managing these companies and brands.
Yeah, well, I think again it goes back to this notion of being out of touch, and then there's also this sense of being proud of being out of touch, and it continues to persist. Just recently at the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, there was all this hullabaloo of creators versus journalists, because the DNC decided to invite 200 creators into the DNC to help cover the convention, and they credited about 15,000 journalists. So obviously the lopsidedness wasn't there in terms of favoritism or numbers, right? But then a lot of journalists were pissing and moaning about how the creators were getting access for some of this stuff. And it's like, why they're getting access? It's because I think the creators are just reaching an audience that is a lot more valuable to them, or they are talking about certain things or talking about certain angles and issues that would work for them and not be filtered through your news outlet. So that's still happening, where there's this mentality where we have to kind of be against whatever change that is happening in the information ecosystem. And I say information ecosystem because it's all being affected right now. People like yourself, or even for me, I view people like Keemstar as a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the media executives still haven't gotten into that mode where it's like, oh, my main competitor right now at the Washington Post is the New York Times. Look at what they're doing with the Daily, as opposed to thinking, oh no, the real threat is Joe Rogan. The real threat was Joe Rogan several years ago. They completely missed that.
Mm-hmm.
Or the real threat is people like Keemstar or Drama Alert, or even Philip DeFranco, and a lot of these media companies are very siloed and very traditional in how they think about how information is being distributed and being consumed, and what audiences actually want. And that really kind of ties back into, and I'm really glad you mentioned it earlier in the introduction, my whole career in social media work and audience work, and that was the work that really catapulted me out of the local media market, which you said is very rare these days. You don't really see that a lot, where a guy like me works in a local paper, the hometown paper. I worked at the Guam paper, had a horrible time there, but from going from that all the way to the Valhalla of the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, right? And I'm very proud of that trajectory. But it's very hard, a lot of these folks are just leaving straight out of Columbia School and going straight into these newsrooms, and that's fine. But we just need to hire more diverse people.
Yeah. Like everything comes with pluses and minuses. Our mutual friend, Taylor Lorenz, who was a very nice person, by the way. No, people don't believe me. In person, all my interactions, Taylor Lorenz, she's one of the nicest people I've ever engaged with.
That's cool that you met her in person. Yeah, and she's one of my favorites too. She's one of my earliest friends in DC.
She makes this point when she was on the show earlier this year, and she's told me this several times, that it's, she does great work trying to cover TikTok and influencers, what we think of like current new media. But she's made this point that when she tries to talk with people who are in the news, and like why this is important, this is the stuff people actually care about. They're thinking about what our favorite YouTube guy or our favorite, social media influencer, what's the trend on Twitter or TikTok. They go back to the people who control media, and they have just no interest in it whatsoever. And tailors can go like, look, here are my articles. Here's how they performed. This is obviously something people care about. But then she just gets a blank wall. It just goes nowhere. I've had that experience too, covering different issues, and it drives you just crazy because you're like, look, here's the proof. It's right here.
No idea. There's data. There's hard data. It's traffic. It's audience. It's young people, as they keep saying. So, I do think that our society in general, on the planet, human society, is generally fairly sick. I think that we are always talking about having these priorities for people. Politicians are always talking about how important education is, and the money doesn't go there. And we're always talking about, oh, we have to serve the young audience, and we always have to serve the broader audience, and that just never happens. So there is a certain level. I think that explains this huge backlash against institutions that started happening around 2015, 2016, where people are just getting tired of being ignored, and that's why there's this blanket mistrust of institutions, misguided or otherwise. But I understand it.
Yeah. No, for the most part, I think the mistrust is pretty much earned. Like, I think people take it too far in what it means, but I think the institutions have generally kind of failed people for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Taylor, because I saw Taylor just a couple of weeks ago when she was here for there was a whole influencer meetup at the White House. So I gotta spend time with her, and yeah, we just spent our whole time just yelling at each other about various issues and everything like that. So it makes me smile to hear that Taylor was saying this to you, because Taylor and I are pretty much of the same mind when it comes to quite a lot of things, and especially when it comes to our own frustrations with the media industry that we are working in, and that we're benefiting from too. So
yeah. I want to definitely talk about your, the really hard stuff you went through few years, just 2 years back with cancer. But before you do, tell me some of your favorite stories as a games reporter. What are the experiences in your mind where, like, I love my job, this was so cool? Like, what are the best game journalist Gene Parks stories you have?
There are too many, but really, when you say this is so cool or what is my life, it's really
okay.
just
Kojima. Kojima. I know
Kojima,
you're a huge fan of Kojima, all things Kojima, and you've met the guy.
Yeah. So, and I've been thinking about like tweeting this out or whatever, but I always have this thought that there are really maybe three men who are the most influential in my life. It would be Kurt Cobain. It's probably of Nirvana is probably the number one earliest influence. And I think going back to your very first question about why I seem so down to earth, I think a lot of it is I learned that from Kurt Cobain and like the way he dealt with fame. So that became like, oh, this is how you deal with fame, with nonchalance and apathy and frustration, maybe, right? But then also the other person would be Bob Dylan, in terms of how much of a rule breaker he is, and then the other person would be Hideo Kojima, just what his games have done for me. So, I've interviewed heads of state, I've interviewed famous politicians, I've met Bill Clinton when I was a teenager. I covered him when he came to Guam. The only time I've ever been nervous interviewing anybody was Hideo Kojima, and I knew that would happen. And even when I was there, I was like visibly sweating, like I was dripping, like dripping drops from my upper lip. It was amazing. I had never seen myself be like that, because for me, I'm always of the thought that every human being is just as impressive as an expert. If I met Barack Obama to Elon Musk to John Cena to whoever, I'd be like, yeah, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
But for someone like Kojima, he did transcend in terms of a level of existence in my mind. So that was really crazy for me, at least in terms of just being a fanboy and everything. I haven't really done too much gumshoe reporting as a gaming journalist. A large part of that is due to a good 2-3 years of that being one, I had cancer, and two, the pandemic also as well really restricted my movement. So, when we first started launching in 2019, I attended TwitchCon, and so that was going to be, we were really going to start attending events, like, oh, we're going to go to Game Awards, and we did go to the Game Awards. My colleague Nathan and Shannon Liao, now at Inverse, did go to the Game Awards. So, yeah, it's just the past few years have been rough on me, due to a lot of health related things for the world and for me.
Yeah, no, and Shannon's great. I've interacted with her a few times. She's very nice. Yeah, I was listening for this research. I was listening to a podcast, and this is before you knew you had cancer, and you thought it was just COVID. You're saying, I feel like crap. I feel really bad. This COVID's hit really hard.
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell me about what were you thinking, when you got that cancer diagnosis? What was the process going through your head at that time?
I really feel bad, because I misdiagnosed myself as COVID, long COVID, and it was my general practitioner who did not see me, who did only a video call, and she said, oh, it sounds like you have long COVID, and that's why I worked on an assumption. And it wasn't until a couple months later where other symptoms started showing up where I was like, I don't think this is long COVID anymore. I started shut up about that. And I started to get real serious about seeing someone else. And then so when I did finally see a gastroenterologist, and they saw me in the hospital, they were like, they said, you need to go to the ER right now. You're about to pass out. And I was like, cool, awesome. So I went to the ER. This was in 2022, so COVID was still raging, and awful time to go to the ER. I actually spent in a few nights in the hallway because the ER was so crowded. So that was terrifying, and I was pretty sure I had cancer at that point, even before diagnosis. And then once we finally did the colonoscopy and the scan, they were like, "Yep, you got colon cancer." How did that feel? I distinctly remember it. I watched Breaking Bad again after I had cancer, and after I got better, I definitely didn't want to watch it during it, right? But I wanted to watch it afterwards. One, because it's an amazing show, and so we watched.
Yeah.
But two, I wanted to see how well they understood cancer, right? And it really was like when Walter White was told in that first episode, and the doctor was telling him, and the world just kind of becomes mute, and you just kind of stop existing for a while. I don't know. It just you're just kind of like I feel like my brain was trying to adjust to not exist anymore. Like, oh well, if I'm gonna die, then I might as well just die right now. It was tough. And then the only thing I could do next was ask, what do we got to do? And fortunately, my surgical team, my doctors, did have a plan that was very, very strenuous and invasive, and even to the point where I don't want to talk about it publicly, what I went through. But I was medically disabled, and my body did change for quite a bit of time until I got the tumor removed. And I went through chemotherapy that whole time too, so that was tough. But I'm grateful to the Washington Post that they let me basically not work or work when I wanted to during that year, and then but it was upsetting when I came back and I got better, and then that's when they laid my whole team off.
Yeah, because I think I read that somewhere, that it was during when you were struggling with this. You got your idol, someone you really respected, Mr. Kojima. He reached out, and
He did. He emailed me while I was sick, and he sent a picture of himself and the article that I wrote on him about Death Stranding, and he said, I really remember our interview. It was a real special one, and it wasn't one that it was like one. It was like one of a kind. It was like, I've never really had an interview like that before, and I hope you get better, so we can talk about my next games. And I'm looking forward to the next interview. And when I got that email, this was still in the middle of like October, 2022, when I was still very sick. I just dropped to my knees and I started sobbing, and then that was the moment when I realized, like, man, look at the life I built, man. Fucking Hideo Kojima, my idol, the person who is equivalent to Bob Dylan in my life, right? Reached out to me and said, yo, I really like talking to you, and I love the article, and I can't wait to Like, this is my life, I can't leave that behind. Like the life, and that breakthrough moment for me was so important because I have been suicidal my whole life. I do suffer from depression. So yeah, for so much of my life, I struggled. I was like, well, I should just fucking go because what's the point, right? I have huge existential dread, and what's the point? Blah blah. But when Kojima sent me that, I was like, I built too good of a life at this point for me to leave this. I can't leave this behind. It's too good right now. So that really solidified for me why I need to keep fighting and why I need to keep going. And that it was an inspiration. It was real tough. But, yeah.
I'm so glad that was a special moment. Thank you for sharing that. My sister had a germ cell ovarian cancer, and I remember when that happened, and that just alone what everything it did to her and everything after, but how it just kind of sucked the color out of life for our entire family.
Yeah.
It's heavy. I mean, it's really, really hard.
I have a sister, and she went through it too emotionally. She was like, "Oh shit, might lose my brother." And Taylor actually came to see me, and that was great. And my best friend Karen from Hong Kong, she was absolutely wrecked. So she flew all the way from Hong Kong to DC just to see me. And I actually just saw her a couple weeks ago, and she finally admitted to me, "You know what? I really thought you were gonna fucking die." She went back to her husband and says, "Yeah, Gene's not looking too good. I think that might have been the last time I seen him." And she really didn't know how to deal with it, because I lost 60 pounds. I was 105 pounds.
Holy cow!
So I was a real stick. And a huge part of my recovery was you need to gain that weight back, Gene. And then so, a lot of people think that, to beat cancer, you have to eat everything green, everything has to be gluten free, or blah blah blah. No, my doctors were like, you need to eat a shit ton of meat, particularly red meat. You need to eat steak, you need to eat pork, you need all that iron, and you need all that protein. So I basically, who's that swimmer, the famous swimmer, Michael Phelps, right? Michael Phelps.
Yes.
The famous Olympian. He got famous when he was swimming for having a diet that was 30,000 calories a day. I was required to eat 6,000 calories a day. So I was just pounding food every day, like so much pasta and steak and everything like that. I was having a great time, just eating whatever I wanted. And so by the time the surgery came, 7 months later, I was back to my normal weight. I gained 60 pounds back by eating my way through it. And my surgeon was like, "Holy shit, yeah, you really did it. I think we're ready to cut you open now." So
yeah, there's that story of the YouTuber, is it Nick Avocado or Nick Cavato, how he lost all that weight. You were kind of doing the reverse. You were just trying to pack it on as fast as you can.
Yeah. Well, that's why I have a real anxiety over losing weight now. I'd rather gain weight now. I'd rather just laugh and grow fat, as Fat Man would say in Metal Gear Solid 2. I always loved that quote, and now I'm just like, no, I'm living it. So now I'm a fat 180 pounds, not fat exactly, skinny fat, as the kids say, but I love it. 180 pounds is the heaviest I've ever been. I got a big old belly, and I love seeing more of me. Just more of me in general is good.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear. I know I was praying for you at the time. I know lots of people were, because it's like you're just losing Gene Park, because you're the one, because I can talk to you, and you have been kind enough to say that you've watched my show, and when you said that,
I have, yeah. I enjoy these interviews, yeah.
That was like, that made me feel good. I've heard this from a number of people, whether they're left, well, I guess. Sorry, the camera, so it's left or right. They all agree Gene Park is great. And I can't get them to hardly agree on anything else. But they do agree on this point. And so you are one of those few people, I think, in this terrible time of the culture war and everyone angry at each other, that everyone seems to agree they like Gene Park. Unless they hate whatever your take is of that day about some game. But barring that, everyone seems to like him.
Yeah. Um, I mean, a large part of it is due to the fact that I've been on social media almost the whole time I've been on social. So for people who don't know, my background in social media actually goes back to high school. And I don't know if how much I've talked about this puppy or you know about this, but I was actually the moderator of Guam's chat room. There was one chat room on Guam, and it was run by the internet service provider. And he was kind of like the internet guy at the ISP, and he started a Java-based chat room. And I was 15, 16 years old, and huge on the internet, or I was becoming on the internet, and I was like, I was all over the chat room, and he was like, "Do you want to be a mod?" And I was like, "Sure." So I was basically a fucking Discord mod.
Oh my gosh.
It was like in like 1997, 1996, but for the entire island nation of Guam. And my name was Jack, because Jack. Well, my favorite character in a book at the time was Jack Meridew, who was the bad kid in Lord of the Flies. Um, he was the guy who like kills Piggy and is basically like who becomes like the Satan of the boys group, right? And I just thought he was so cool, but I just thought Jack Meridew itself is a cool name, so I named myself after him. And also the fact that my Christian name at birth is John Eugene Park, and Jack is a nickname for John. So I just went by Jack. So on Guam, I was called Jack all over the place. And as moderator of this chat room, I was like arranging like our IRL meetups. So we will call them chat meets, and I would go to different bars, and I would I would just be like this little 16-year-old kid. I was like, hey, I got this group of people in. I can guarantee like 50 people in the bar if you just let us rent the space or whatever like that. So I was really like wheeling and dealing like event spaces back then, and then I would host like these parties at it was this place called Sharky's on Guam. It was a pool bar, and so yeah, I was just a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid like hosting these like 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old people who were on the internet. And
At
I don't know how I
16.
got started. I don't know how I got started on this. What were we talking about?
It's a
What,
fascinating it's a fascinating story.
what were we talking about earlier?
We were, I don't know where we were going. We were talking about cancer, then we got talked about social media, and then you were talking about how you, as 16 years old, was putting together meetups.
Yeah. Well. I mean, that just explains like my whole history with social media. Oh, so I've been on social media for so long that I think I have a pretty good instinct of what to say and what not to say, you know, especially as a journalist, I've been very wary about saying things that are too political or too outrageous, to the point that it will get me in trouble. And I still get in trouble. I've gotten in trouble quite a number of times at the Washington Post. I've gotten a number of your email emails from management. There was one where I called Mitch McConnell old, and I got in trouble for that, which was very frustrating because a couple of weeks later, the entire news cycle was talking about how old our president was, and I was just like, "Oh my god!"
You were too soon.
This again goes back to my frustration with the institution and the mainstream media space, where it's like, this politeness for politeness sake, or just protection for protection's sake. It's just ridiculous and hypocritical, but whatever. But
Yeah, no, and for reporters, it's like you're told, like, we want engagements. Well, you guys understand how you get that, right? Well, we know we don't want engagement this way.
yeah, so that's why journalists can only say things like interesting and fascinating. So I am fortunate that like I'm a critic. I'm considered a critic at the Washington Post, and I can have opinions on games. That's cool. But I would not be able to say, "Oh, thank goodness that Joe Biden did this," or "Oh, I can't believe Joe Biden did that." Stuff like that. Or I can't even talk about Gaza and Israel, like so many other games media can't. They're all completely able to be an activist for certain causes or social causes. I probably wouldn't be able to say like Happy Pride or Go Pride or blah blah blah, or Trans Lives Matters and stuff like that, because I would just get in trouble for it. So it's you know, a lot of people think like, oh, Gene doesn't really get involved in the culture war. I mean, that's by design.
Gene Park leashed.
You know, it is. Yeah, I am quite leashed, but I'm used to it. You know,
I'm almost scared to find out what Gene Park Unleashed is like.
it might be pretty bad. So, so it's good that it's leashed. But I mean, as a consequence of that, like politically, I am kind of a fence sitter because I do have to kind of do that. When there was 1 year in Hawaii where I was not a journalist, I actually just got laid off. Or no, I didn't get laid off. I quit. I did get laid off 1 year, but then after I came back, I quit from 2013 to 2014. And during that time, that's when I started to accumulate a lot of other stories, including I started to, you know, that's how I was a PR agent for famous Amos Cookies. Not the cookie company himself, but famous Amos himself. And a lot of people were shocked at that story. So to catch people up, Wally Amos, the creator of famous Amos Cookies and the guy who made those cookies, died recently. And he was not the owner of that company. He actually went broke because the company bought him out and told him he can never use his famous Amos name ever again. And he tried to make other cookies, and they were never as famous as famous Amos, even though he is literally famous Amos. But I felt bad for him, and he was a cool dude, really old dude, lived in Hawaii, and I wanted to help him out. So at pro bono work, I did PR work for him. I tried to promote his cookies, and I got him on TV and everything like that too. And we're like, eat these cookies; they're really good. And it was real tough. But during that time, when I was also hawking cookies, I was also working with politicians. So I worked for the congressional campaign for former Mayor Mufi Hanneman, and he was up against Tulsi Gabbard. And that was the campaign where Tulsi won, and she became congresswoman. And that started her whole career into her current national spotlight and everything like that. Which is funny because Tulsi is actually a friend of mine. But I did believe in her opponent's campaign more. So, but again, that goes to show like how I don't take personal relationships into account. You know, I really do follow what I believe it would be the correct passage forward for certain things. You know, so even though Tulsi was my friend, I believe her opponent would be would be better suited, even though he was actually more socially conservative at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I also helped out the congressional campaign for former Governor Linda Lingle, who is a Republican. But I helped her out because current Congresswoman Mazie Hirono, I did not like her. I still don't like her, you know? So there I was helping out a Republican campaign against a Democrat, you know, because I just, you know, and even though she was more socially conservative and I disagree with her, I believe she would probably be more economically more smarter and even socially smarter than her, to having her in Congress. And even you know, and it's not like she could pass gay marriage in Congress anyway. So it's like the social contract of it didn't even matter. I just thought she'd just be a better congresswoman. So I mean, that's how I think politically. If that offers some insight, you know.
I do hear, on occasion, people trying to guess, what is Gene's politics?
Mm-hmm.
What team is he on? Is he on our team? Is he on their team? Mm-hmm. What team? What team?
There's no team. I just the team is whatever I think makes most people happy. I mean, that's how I think.
I feel like, you know, until we can end our last 25 minutes or so here talking about games, but I feel like great games culture, I feel like all this is above politics. I feel like sometimes adding, not like people make this mistake like Final Fantasy is political or not political. I'm just saying like partisan electoral politics. I think it's just below a lot of culture, and I feel like we only kind of sully it when we bring it down.
I agree. I completely agree with that, actually. I believe that we can talk about games in a way that could be political, but it doesn't have to be of the moment of the topic of the day or the moment of the day or anything like that. And, you know, I just tweeted this today, but Roger Ebert is my idol when it comes to writing and when it comes to criticism, you know? And he wasn't talking about the political aspects of the day, although he was very politically progressive and that would reflect in his writing and his philosophy. But his reviews were never about certain topics or certain things. He would always advocate for, like he really spoke up for A Better Luck Tomorrow, which was one of the Asian movies, right? One of the early movies directed by an Asian cast and an Asian director. And then, I remember one critic was like, "Well, this is about a bunch of Asian ruffians. Wouldn't you want the Asians to put forward their best foot forward and be more, respectable?" And then Roger Ebert was like, "Fuck that, for more diversity's sake, people should be allowed to be able to present who they are. And if these people felt like that this is the best story, then this is their true authentic selves. This is the true expression of what they felt the art would be,
Yeah.
And again, that is progressive in terms of letting people tell their stories, but it didn't be like, no, well, Asian lives matter, or blah blah blah. He wasn't making a stance; he was making a good, cogent argument for what would be critical for art, and that's kind of how I approach things.
Yeah. No, and that's good. That's enough. It doesn't need to be more. That's fine. If it wants to be more, also fine. But
That's also fine too. And I'm not looking down on that stuff. That's just not me. That's just not what I want. That's just not how I want to write.
fair enough. Okay, so what games are you into right now? I mean, you were obviously always on the treadmill. Got to get the reviews in. Got to keep up what's going on in games. What are you playing for fun? What do you relax to these days?
Right now I'm actually really, really obsessed with Black Myth Wukong. A game that I did not like at first. I thought it was fairly mid. Didn't start out strong, and even when I finished it, I was like, that was okay. And I still think it's okay. Because I think the weakest part of it is the fact that it is so much like a Souls-like. But I like everything about it that isn't like a Souls-like, the cool combos and everything. But then I watched a cool fight at the beginning of the game, and I'm like, I wish they made a game that was more like that, more cinematic, more back and forth clashing versus the monkey hitting the guy with a stick 1,000 times. But I'm really starting to understand his combat system a lot more. I didn't like his level design. I still don't. But it is kind of becoming addictive to kind of, now that I know what to do, it is fun to. It does comfort a part of my brain where like, I know what to do. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to get this key here. I'm going to get this key here. I'm going to get this key here. I like doing sequential things in games. It calms me, especially when I know what to do. So it's a huge reason why the Resident Evil series is actually my favorite series of all time. Because I enjoy, I wouldn't call myself a speedrunner, but I enjoy what is essentially kind of, I guess, speedrunning through the game, is where I'm just like, okay, well, I'm going to do this, 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 and then boom, I beat the game in a day or two. But that's always fun, and it's always very relaxing. It always makes me feel like I'm putting everything in its right place, because that's essentially what the games are. We're putting the keys in the right place, we're putting the statues in the right place, and that gives me a huge level of satisfaction that I don't get from many other games, including even like Astrobot, for example. Astrobot is very fun and very forward moving, but not really accomplishing things, versus a game like Resident Evil or even Black Myth Wukong or Dark Souls too. So again, like, it kind of follows like a kind of Souls like rhythm to it that that still makes my brain relax a lot more.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot lately. I've been getting into. I like modding games a lot. Well, because I'm disabled, I'm poor, so messing with the games I already have purchased is a little easier than necessarily buying more. I've been I had to go camping. I had this. I haven't been able to use it for years and years. I actually love Nintendo stuff, but so a friend was like, "Well, you can mod it, and then there are ways you can change it so it has a visual and color filter." It said my eyes have an issue where bright lights. I knew you go into all that, but it was a problem. But you can mod it and you can change it so you can make it so it works great for my eyes. So I've been really enjoying that a lot. And the mod scene for the 3DS is amazing. They're for most of the games they've been able to unlock, if you have a new 3DS, the second CPU core, and it fixes a lot of games like MGS3 on the 3DS. I don't know if you remember that game, but it had like a really slow frame rate compared to the actual original on the PS2. But they unlock this core and it pops up to about 29, 30 FPS. And it's much smoother. So there's really cool stuff going on. I also really like to relax to Masao. I have a terrible taste in games. Masao games, you know.
Yeah, Muso games. Yeah, no, I love those. Yeah.
I love those kind of things. I like the Masao games. I love the games by. I love it. Japan has this more than the U.S. where they have like what is it? Bakujo no Monogatari. So the what we used to be called Harvest Moon Astoria seasons, where it's like this is like one guy and like a few dozen people, and then they're just kind of gonna make the same game over and over again for 20 to 30 years. And I enjoy that for some reason. It's just very, like you said, it's very relaxing. It's like, oh, I'm kind of familiar with this. It's slightly different, so it's a little bit new, but it's still the same.
It's funny because cozy games give me a lot of anxiety. So, but a lot of people think that it's weird that I find Dark Souls and Elden Ring relaxing, and it's like I think those games are very, very relaxing to me. But I'm weird. I listen to the Dunkirk soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, and this is a very, very aggressive and loud soundtrack where it's like it's like blahs and brass and like that. But I listen to that to go to sleep. I listen to it on the plane, and it puts me right to sleep. It eases my mind, you know. So I like a lot of like dissonant, loud stuff. You know, I used to, Nine Inch Nails used to be my lullaby. So that probably explains a lot too.
You must have been the biggest edgelord on Guam back in the day.
I was a huge edgelord on Guam, dude. I was so bad. You know what's f***ed up is that like you obviously everyone's heard of Columbine, right? And then the part of Columbine was the trenchcoat mafia. Do you remember that they were called that?
Yeah, trench coats are huge. We're coming into near the Matrix also those years.
Yeah,
yep.
I was wearing trench coats and boots before that shit happened. You know, so it was really, really bad when Columbine happened. I got picked on so much because everyone looked at me. They're like, "Gene, that's you. You're the one. You're literally wearing a trench coat. You like Marilyn Manson, and you're playing Doom all the time." You know. And so people picked on me all the time. They were like, "Gene, that's just you." And I was like, honestly, you guys, yeah, you know. So, but yeah, it was really, really hot. It's really, really hot on Guam, and that's like that was a phase that lasted for about a year because it was just so hot. But I did wear a trench coat. I did have long hair. I was into like punk rock and metal. Was it a punk band called the Numbskulls? And we used to cover like Fugazi and like punk covers of Guns N' Roses songs and everything. Yeah, I'm glad you. Wow, you really clocked me there. Yeah, I was super edgy.
No, this has been. It's funny to me, and we're like, you know, look who's here now. I'm here at the Washington Post. Bunch of you losers. You're stuck over there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't really talk to anybody from high school anymore. I basically disassociate with everybody from high school because I had a terrible time in high school. That's a huge part of my background, is that I was picked on relentlessly in Guam. It wasn't until I started drinking and smoking that people like just left me alone. They're like, "Oh, well, Gene's kind of doing that now, so it's fine," you know. And I also started to fight back. I actually fought back against one of my bullies, and he started to leave me alone. And he actually apologized to me much later in life when I went back to Guam. I turned out I actually ran into him at the strip club, and we bonded over the women. And I told him, "Bro, you owe me $174 of lunch money." I counted all that shit. That's how psychotic I am, and that's how pissed off I was at you. And he says, "I will get you a lap dance." And then so he bought me a $200 lap dance, and I was like, "You like you just made up all the years of torment from first grade through ninth grade. Thank you, man." So we're friends now. We're totally cool. So we're just on Instagram, just hyping each other up all the time now. It's cool. It's a good ending to a good story. You know, I love it.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
Dude, I feel like so much of this, even like YouTube, internet drama, it's like everyone's just still in high school. Like they're just stuck. I'm like, I didn't really like high school. I don't want to be stuck there.
That's what I realized growing up, man. Because, you know, I covered politicians in Guam, and I was like, oh my God, politicians in Guam are so immature, right? They're so stupid, and they're so dumb. And then so I moved to Hawaii, and I was like, surely the folks in Hawaii are more put together. This is a bigger state, there's more money flowing through, better education here. So surely the people must be smarter here. And I approached Hawaiian politicians, like, oh my God, these people are so stupid. And then so I go to Washington D.C. I was like, well, surely the most educated city in the United States must be full of smart people. And then I was like, oh my God, these are some of the dumbest people I've ever met. Like, I swear to God, the people in Guam are smarter. So I really do think that a lot of today's problems are rooted in the fact that so many people have not matured much further than what they were, who they were in high school. Because it is a lot of high school mentality. There's a lot of immaturity that's still all over, not even in the YouTube space, but in the political space as well, and in the executive space as well,
Yeah.
Look at Elon Musk and how childish he is, and how much power and influence he holds too, So yeah, it's just everywhere,
Would you consider, because I've heard you say this before, that, I think at one point you were considering maybe working for Bungie, and I've heard you say things like, well, maybe I consider becoming a content creator. You have the Twitter platform, and you're obviously good at connecting with people, building audiences. So I think whatever you apply your hand to, at least it has some kind of communications aspect, you do well. Do you ever still think like that? Do you ever have, I mean, what do you think Gene Park in 10 years is going to be doing?
I think about that all the time. And a lot of people are always telling me like, oh, Gene, you could just totally just be me on your own, because I really don't even think of you, like my friend Skillup, a huge content creator and YouTuber. He was like, I don't even think of you as the Washington Post guy anymore. I just think of Gene Park, the Washington Post is your platform, and I appreciate that, and I see that, and it makes me wonder all the time. A large part of the reason why I'm still staying at the Washington Post is because I do enjoy the prestige of it, to be quite frank. But also I enjoy, and I don't know how much more longer I can do this, but I enjoy trying to affect some kind of change within the institution, and I've grown. I've nourished a lot of respect within the organization, and that's really hard to do. And that's why it makes it hard to lead, because it's like, okay, well, politically I've already engendered myself within this vast organization. So to entangle myself would be to, kind of change the game and change a lot of my priorities right now. And I'm not really sure I want to do that. I love the Washington Post. I want to help it succeed, and that's a large part of the reason why I'm staying there, because the Washington Post is taking care of me too. They took care of me while I was sick. I know for sure that my company in Hawaii be like, oh shit, Gene's got cancer. Well, he's on the door. I know for a fact that they would have tried to engineer some way to get me out of the door while I was sick, right? Whereas the Washington Post, they said, Gene, you have nothing to worry about. You will always have your job. We will always be here for you when you come back, and it's important that you come back.
Oh yeah, no way I'm leaving that. No.
Yeah, so that is that. So they do make me feel special. I do love the Washington Post, as frustrated as I can be. There, for me, it's like, oh well, I'm just frustrated. I feel like any of my frustrations, I'm old enough to be like, I felt this frustration before. I'm old enough to know I can't just jump ship and hope for something better somewhere else.
It's crazy, man. Like, follow all the people that worked at Game Informer, like Brian McKean, like top people who have like decade plus of experience. These are like really respected professionals in your industry. They can't get work. And I've seen this all over the last year since Google did their shenanigans. And I was this close to like a really good job. But then the literal day I got the papers to sign, then they're like, sorry, Pete, we can't keep any of our staff. There's no way we can bring on new people out.
That's tough, man. Yeah.
Dude, it's so bad out there right now. The state of the media is. So I'm like, Washington Post is one of those few places that's like doing okay in the current environment, and they want to take care of you. Like, heck yeah. Like, okay, if I was you, I'd be like, okay, I'm just gonna sit here sit here pretty, enjoy as long as it lasts. But
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it earlier, where it's like I am a rare story of coming from small town paper. You know, the Guam paper, the circulation was 22,000. You know, my school paper had a higher circulation than that. You know, so and my salary was reflected that my salary was $24,000 a year. You know, pennies. You know, I was earning like $8 an hour. You know,
Mhm.
and you know, my dream always was to move because I went to Southern California, right? My dream was always to go to the Los Angeles Times. You know, I really, really wanted to work at the LA Times. I worshipped the paper. I read it while I was going to school. I loved the writing. I loved the photography. I loved the way they covered communities. And they never gave me a chance. I never got an internship. I even applied for their affirmative action internship. They have an internship for minorities, and they rejected me. You know, so I didn't
They
even get
lost.
I didn't even get an interview with them. And then I really wanted to work at the Orange County Register, and Orange County Register is a very, very libertarian paper, and that is where I get like that is probably a good root place for a lot of my more conservative or libertarian kind of thinking. That, and I read Ayn Rand when I was growing up, definitely too.
That'll do it.
But I tried to get a job at the Orange County Register, and they would hire me, but they had some weird requirement in place where they were trying to be more diverse, but then they did it in a weird way where every new hire had to know a second language, any second language at all. I could have learned Russian, and they would have hired me, right? But I didn't know a second language, so I just didn't get hired. So that's how I ended up back on Guam. And I was in Hawaii, and I was frustrated with my station in Hawaii. I was like, I am tired of just being in the Hawaii paper. I want to move back to California. You know, I want to move back to LA. I want to be back to where good food, good tacos are. You know, beautiful women. I mean, there are beautiful women in Hawaii. Who am I kidding? But also beautiful women in California. And then it's why I switched from being a regular reporter to switch my career to going into social media and audience building, because I was like, I'm not that good of a reporter, to be quite honest. I'm really not. I don't consider myself the best games journalist. I'm definitely not anywhere close to like the best journalist or whatever. I'm a good city reporter. I'm a good beat reporter, right? But I'm not one of the best. So based on my reporting, I never would have ended up at the Washington Post. Never, never, ever. But I'm really, really good at social media. I was there. I was a Discord mod when I was 16. And I know the internet, and I know the way people engage with people, with things on digital content. And I did a great job. And that was the work that ended up making me, I was like, okay, well, if I focus on this aspect of journalism, then maybe I can get my foot in the door into a bigger place. Maybe I can show the LA Times, hey, look, your reporting is won Pulitzers, but no one's reading that shit. No one's reading that shit. Let me help you, you know?
Yeah.
And so I did that with civilbeat.org, which is a nonprofit startup investigative news site that's owned by Piero Midyar, the founder of eBay and the founder of PayPal. And he also was the guy who hired Glenn Greenwald back in the day during Intercept. And I worked with them, and I increased their traffic by 534%. I knew exactly what I was doing in terms of getting the audience. I started a whole events program that became a whole new revenue source for them. So I was doing journalism, but in a completely different way. I was organizing communities. I was organizing events. I was making people read stuff. I was creating memes. And then that's when I tried to get them to apply to other places in LA, and they weren't hearing me, but the Washington Post heard me. And that's how I got an interview. And that's how I got hired as a social media guy. So
That's like a superpower. I've spoken with a friend who's he does YouTube, but he's really good as a YouTube producer, and we are kind of discussing that also. That like there, if you building an audience is a very important talent, but if you can grow an audience, you can hold an audience, like that is such a unique talent. That so many people come to YouTube or even journalism, and they lack that ability. But so that's like your superpower, Gene. That's kind of what sets you apart. And I don't think you're a terrible reporter, by the way. I don't need to see Gene Park, on the ground, breaking open this wide story to think that you're doing valuable journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Interviewing these people, trying to get the mainstream media to understand why people artistically engage with video games, that's all very valuable. And
Yeah.
I can speak for my audience, and I can speak, I think, for most people who enjoy your work. We really, really do appreciate you, Gene. And it just like you are a godsend when it feels like everyone has just friggin' lost their minds. Everyone's gone bananas, and you're kind of normal, and you're enjoying games. They're like, yeah, it's cool. You can enjoy games. We're gonna talk about Astrobot. I like Astrobot. You should play Astrobot. That's awesome. That's so fantastic. I know maybe you're like, well, that's like nothing. Like I'm not like, I'm not going out there and breaking it down like I used to as a crime reporter. But there's a lot of value in that, and maybe we could start ending this out. But that I really do appreciate. Like truly do appreciate. I know many, many, many other people, and they've been on the show. Same likewise.
I appreciate that. I'm glad people see that. That I am trying to kind of bring kind of respectability into games criticism, at least in the mainstream space. I am working on a story that does involve a lot of reporting that I can't really talk about right now, but I'm hoping to get that out soon. And and that would be a good exercise for me in terms of like my old school reporting skills. A lot of the reason why I'm enjoying games journalism right now is because I feel like I've earned it, because I never wanted to be in games journalism in the first place. I just wanted to be a regular journalist. I wanted to be a music critic. Music has been my real passion the whole time. I wanted to work for Rolling Stone. But that just doesn't happen, and games started to kind of become more important for me and for most people too. So I feel lucky that I can finally be a games journalist. I talk about Almost Famous and Cameron Crowe a lot, and I think about all the other rock critics of the 70s, right? And my dream was always to kind of replicate what they did, being groupies with not really a groupie, but just hanging out with the rock stars of the moment. The cultural moment, the gods of this era, and being there, and and writing liner notes in albums of my favorite artists, right? And I've done that now. I wrote the liner notes for Starbomb, which is the YouTube rap group started by Game Grumps and Ninja Six Party. And they asked me to write the liner notes for their box set. And I was like, hell yeah, man. Like you guys have, I didn't even tell them this, but I was like, you have no idea how much it means to me to write liner notes for you guys specifically. You guys are huge YouTubers. You guys are huge game creators. And like, I'm living that life right now. I am interviewing, and I'm friends, and I'm with the rock stars of the moment today. The YouTube creators, the video game creators of today. They know who I am, and I'm with them. And so, hey, it turns out I did do what I want to do eventually. So I'm enjoying this right now. I'm glad I don't have to go out and chase ambulances anymore. I don't want to do that anymore.
May it continue many more happy years.
Appreciate that.
We're going to wrap it up. By the way, okay, so is your cat around?
He's like, he's just in the back right now, but yeah.
Yeah. Is your cat, you were saying the character, you like to call yourself Jack back in the day.
Yeah, well, Jack was named Jack already in the shelter. So I was like, well, this is kismet. This is pure karma coming back to me, Like, of course his name is Jack, So I decided, well, your name is Jack, so I'm going to keep you Jack.
It's meant to be.
Because now you're my Jack. So there is a long history with the name Jack. Jack, of course, being my nickname in the chat room, being my nickname as my Christian name, John. And also, of course, Jack the Ripper, Raiden Jack, and Jack Solid Snake, Big Boss in Metal Gear. So it all kind of wraps up together. And also my name is Gene, too, which is the theme of Metal Gear Solid 1, So... and I deal in memes, and again, the reason why Kojima is such a huge influence in my life was because of what Metal Gear Solid 2 talked about in terms of what the internet does and what you leave behind for as a person. All that stuff is exactly what wrapped up in what my life is right now.
Yeah. It is crazy. Kojima's he's got a weird ability to predict the future.
Yeah.
Okay, well, guys, thank you so much for taking time to watch Culturescape today. Gene, do you have any place to plug? Obviously, the Washington Post.
Yeah, listen to me on Punching Up, the Nintendo podcast on Last Stand Media and other Last Stand Media products. We're on Last Stand Media on YouTube, and you can support us patreon.com/Last Stand Media as well. But also, yeah, subscribe to me on Washington Post. The best way to support me on the Washington Post is if you're not a subscriber and you want to be able to give me a little credit and throw us a couple bones because you like my work and you want to subscribe to me. Click on my article, and when you get the prompt to subscribe, click on that one, and that's where I'll get credit for like, oh, Gene got a subscriber, and that would help me specifically. So I appreciate that. A lot of people do that, and that's been great.
Cool. Okay, definitely check it out. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to watch Culturescape. The show has been put together with the help, of course, my wonderful editor, Chris Hollywick, who makes me look way more competent than I actually am, and the good folks at Young Voices, a journalism advocacy organization, and viewers like you. You guys are awesome. You're why I do it, and I really appreciate the support. And so until next time, everyone, keep geeking out. Hey there, gang! If you are a fan of Culturescape, and I know you are, and want to get involved in supporting the show, well, now you can! By joining the Culturescape Patreon, you'll help support me and my editor Chris as we create the show and produce more quality journalism. For just $5 or $10 a month, you not only help us, but get access to our exclusive members-only Discord. You'll also get to vote on and suggest new guests for the interview. So if you are a fellow weeb and love Culturescape, then come join us today on Patreon.